I'm in West Wales and this is my basic guide to bushcraft. This is my very basic guide to bushcraft, and I do apologise for any of the advanced bushcrafters out there who's probably already disliked the video and moved on, and that's fine because the video's not aimed for you. It's aimed for the new guy just coming into bushcraft, or the guy that just wants to reset his mind and his way of thinking. And my guide, my basic guide, will be to basically cover some fire, some plant tree identifications, one that you should know and one that you can look out for that can help you a lot in your journey into bushcraft. Learning about trees and plants is something that you need as an individual to go off and learn the way you want to learn. I would advise that you try and book yourself on a course to go out with somebody who really knows their stuff on plants. Learning trees can be quite easy. Trees are a great resource for the bushcrafter because we're going to be tapping into nature an awful lot during bushcraft. We use all the natural stuff around us and we learn how to use them to either improve our survivability in the woods or our livability in the woods. And for the long-term survivalist, we tap into the resources we have around us all the time. You take, for instance, an old fern. It makes an excellent roof and excellent bedding. The only downside with ferns is they can harvest a lot of ticks, so you don't want them too close to your skin. Oof, makes you want to quiver. There are some basic tools that we need for bushcraft, and this is the very basics. One is our bushcraft knife. These knives are often comes in all shapes and sizes. You could go for a Mora or this style of knife. This is a bit small for a bushcraft knife. You probably want another inch on top of the blade. I just prefer a smaller knife. Of course, Scandinavian grind. So why is that grind favourite to the bushcrafter? And nobody really explains why. Well, the Scandinavian grind's actually a woodworking grind, so we use a lot of natural resources in bushcraft, so that grind makes sense for us to use. However, some guys will prefer all types of hollow grinds and all that. It doesn't mean they're not using a bushcraft knife. It means that they've preferred a different edge over the traditional style knife. And of course, people from all around the world in different places have always opted for the Scandinavian grind. It's easy to sharpen. It does hold quite a good edge. Of course, the steel is just important. O1, D2 make fantastic steel for bushcraft knives, so just keep an eye out for them. And there's other Chinese steels on the market now that I find equally as good. Of course, we do use a combustion device. Mine's tapered to my body on a quick release thing. There's our combustion device that we need. We need a way of making fire. It's important for bushcraft because we use fire for an awful lot. We can use it for sterilising water, cooking our food. It gives us light at night. It gives us heat on cold winter nights. And of course we can use it for signalling for help. And if nothing else, it kind of gives you some satisfaction to go to the woods, make yourself a fire, make yourself a pot hanger, which we'll cover in some part of this video, and have yourself a nice cup of tea. The back edge of your knife, as long as it's 90 degrees off, will throw a spark from your ferrocerium rod, and that's quite important. So if your knife can't do that, or you've recently bought a Mora, just try and get it on a file I normally do mine on, and just file off that back edge, so it will chuck a spark. The ferrocerium rod is probably the most famous way of making fire. You'll hear it called a ferro rod, metal match, a fire rod, a spark rod. I've heard it called thousands of names over the years. I used to use an old magnesium block from the army surplus store, and a lot of the old guys that's been doing this for several years would remember that. They would be on a brown box on the counter for about 50p, and away you went. And we'll talk about mag blocks in a different video later on in my more advanced guide to bushcraft. When using one of these, don't be shy. You get so many sparks with it, and people go, oh, that's a waste of your ferrocerium rod. But if you're new to bushcraft, well, they're pretty cheap anyway. So just have some fun with it. Just watch what you're doing. You don't want to be setting the woods on fire. Or worse, don't practice this at home, particularly in your front room or bedroom, because you don't want to be catching your house on fire either. So be careful, they're not toys. And I had to pick of choice really between the axe and the saw. Now my knife I can baton and split very basic wood with. I can do that quite easily. So I opted to go for a saw. And this is a saw. And it's probably one of the most underestimated tools that we can carry. It allows us to cut wood fast and very precise. Now I'm not saying you can't do that with an axe, but I want to do a whole video on axe and axe safeties and the way we can use an axe to our advantage out in the field. So a saw would be also a really good buy for you if you wanted to start building your kit. Your kit that you look at can really cost as much as you want it to cost. And there's my kind of choice at the moment for really a knife, a saw, a ferrocerium rod. It's probably the kit you should be looking at buying, especially if you're really new into bushcraft, because that'll help you on your journey. So I've seen so many videos overcomplicating a lot of stuff. I'm just going to simplify it for you. So basically, if you were struggling before, at the end of this video, you certainly won't be struggling no more. Being able to do very basic tasks with our bushcraft knives, like carving a tent peg. Very simple camp craft really, and it allows you to be able to carve pegs the length that you need. Now bearing in mind the wild camper camps in all types of different ground and terrain, very often standard pegs that come with a lot of kit and just ain't long enough. So we can make our own quite easily using straight sticks and just our knives. It allows us to lighten our load, and very often if we're moving and travelling through woodlands, we want our kit to be as light as we possibly can get it. So we'll do a few cutting techniques with our knife, and we'll knock up a quick tent peg. There's so many complicated versions of this. And what we're going to use is a couple of cuts. That would be a forehand grip. We can put that to our side and we can strike down, putting a point on there. There's some rules really for using a knife, a right and a wrong way. Try to avoid cutting towards yourself, but on some cuts, in controlled cuts, inevitable that you have to do that. If you're ever cutting towards the inside of your legs in the V shape, it's a big no-no. You need to reposition yourself. You've got a major artery that runs through there called the femoral, and if you cut that out in the woods, you're in a lot of trouble. So we're going to carve a basic tent peg. I'll reposition the camera in a minute. I'm going to put a point on the end. I'm just going to use a chest cut. I'll show you that now. Reposition the camera. So on the chest cut, I'll put the knife in a reversed grip and I put it onto the wood, and I keep my thumb well clear of where I'm cutting. And all I do is angle the knife at the angle I want and pull back. And I can take huge chunks of wood by doing this off my stick and putting a point on it. Just neaten that up a bit. Now, because it's going to be a tent peg, I don't want to put a really sharp point on there, because as soon as I hammer this into the ground, it'll just snap. So I want kind of a blunt-ended point, something like that, something with a bit of strength. Now, cutting my peg to length, I could of course just use my saw if I wanted to, but in this case I'm just going to go around this cut. So there's my peg. I'm going to have it about that long, and what I'm going to do in kind of a beaver fashion, I'm just going to work my knife cutting into the woods, notching it out. So you can see I've just started there, and I'm just going to notch that out, and I'll just use a forehand grip on this, and I do it in a very controlled fashion. I'm pointing the knife away from me, and I go right around the stick, kind of like a beaver if you like, nibbling away at the wood. And at all times I make sure I'm in full control of my knife. So I've gone right the way around. Now I could go right the way around again if I wanted to, and on a really big stick you may have to go around a couple of times, but on this stick I'm sure I'm pretty well much there. That's it. Put my knife down or in a safe place. Normally the knife should go back in the sheath, and then I just break that stick on my beaver cut, so you end up with that. So there's my peg. And bearing in mind, one length of wood you could make 6 or a dozen pegs. So we got this end now, and we just want to trim this up. Now, depending on your skill level, you can just do this away from you, so you're not cutting towards you if you wanted to, or you can just use it back and you keep your thumb this side of the wood well clear of the edge, and you just peel it back. Now normally you would just trim up these edges. Anytime in bushcraft we want to use this as a knocking point, we always trim up the edges, and it stops the wood and the fibres from splitting on the end. But of course, because we've done the beaver cut, we don't really need to do that. So you end up with that so far. The next thing we're going to do is a V-notch on it. A V-notch is probably one of the notches I see people struggling with all the time. So what I'm going to do to make this easier for you is I simply put a cross where I want my V-notch to be. And this is where the Scandinavian grind knives really do come into their own. I turn it around. Now this is always going to be an awkward one because you're working opposites. So there's my V-notch. What I do then is I cut up towards that cross. I clear that away. And then because I'm working opposites, left hand, you'll struggle with this even if you're right-handed. I then cut down. And this now will eventually become the V-notch that I want. And I kind of dig in and play around with it I can make it as neat and as tidy as I want to, but bearing in mind it's only going to be a tent peg. And that's my V notch, and you can see the V there, and then our paracord will just get wrapped around that. Now, to improve this peg, I would place the point, and even the end sometimes, it depends on the ground. I place that into a fire to harden it, and it's just like tempering metal or hardening metal. You drive out the moisture, and the fibres then start getting much harder, solider. It gives you a solid peg, and that's as simple as that, a tent peg. And you can obviously cut these to as long and as short as you want, and it's a great way to start using your bushcraft knife, because pretty well much anyone can carve one of them. You can knock up 6, 8 of them in 5-6 minutes. It's easy as that. Whenever it comes to the outdoors, the fundamentals really, or the very basics, is to be able to create fire. I'm back in South Wales now. Beautiful place, beautiful location. But wherever you go, wherever you are in the world, it makes no difference. The fundamental basics of making a fire never change. And in bushcraft, we often use many different techniques. A lighter, like these lighters, giving you a sure flame can pretty well much, very often guarantee you a fire if you know what you're doing with it. Of course, the box of matches, it's one of my favourite methods of making fire. A match, very traditional, used by people pretty well much all around the world, especially in the cold places and in the old hunter cabins and things. You'll always find a box of matches. And it's a very underestimated way of making fire. It costs you kind of a few pence for a box of matches, and 2 or 3 boxes in any kit certainly never go astray or miss. And of course our ferrocerium rod, which is really a gold standard way for the bushcrafter to be able to make fire. There's all different types and all different lots. Now up where I am, very often you'll see people and guys carrying all types of weird and wonderful man-made ways of making fire. This is silver birch. I'm very lucky that a farmer had taken down a silver birch tree and I collected up the bark. And I really advise that you, if you get an opportunity, whenever you see it, is you kind of fill yourself up a bag of it. It's an excellent way of making fire wherever you are. If it's wet, out wet, cold, you can make fire with it. It quite easily takes a spark or a match. It'll even take a spark from your ferrocerium rod and ignite. And it contains oil. So you'll notice you don't need to cut down live trees on the birch, silver birch trees. You'll notice a dead fall one. the wood inside the bark will be rotten, but the actual bark doesn't rot, and that's because it does contain oil. You can kind of light it, you can see it instantly goes up with a vengeance. Excellent way of making fire. So we'll have a look at the other way, which is feather sticking. Now there's so many different methods of feather sticking. I'm just going to show you a couple of the ways that I do my feather sticks. So when we feather stick, the best thing we can do first of all is use the back of our knife to make a bit of a fuzz stick. And this piffy stuff here quite readily takes a spark. And if you're doing this with hardwoods, it works exceptionally well. And you don't see a lot of people do this, but it's actually worth taking the time to do that before you start your feather stick, especially if you need a bit of a boost in real wet conditions. That can really help. And what we want to do is take that from the inner core of the stick, because that'll be the most driest point on the wood. So I take off these amazing shavings. There we go. So the feather stick itself is here. This is the stick we're going to try and feather up. And the way that we do this or achieve this is by placing our stick down, using our knife. You can see this angle isn't very good, so I'm going to try and level that off a bit before I start feathering, which is what I'll do. And I just want to basically slice down in a slicing motion 3 or 4 times. Now you can obviously do these as long as you want, as far as you want, but then I readjust my knife and I take down, so I keep it near on straight. Do like 5 of them, and then I aim the knife at a slight angle backwards in a cutting down motion, like so. And eventually you'll build up a massive feather stick, one that's good enough to obviously take a spark. Kind of 3 or 4, maybe 5 of them, coming in straight, come back, nice and straight. Once he planes off so he's to a level, he'll stop. And then I slice down the wood in a bit of a slicing motion. I just let the knife do the work. This is where you be a bit lazy. Always let your tools do the work for you, so you haven't got to. And eventually you end up with these beautiful feather sticks. Now what I normally do is, instead of feather sticking all one side, I often turn the wood then and I go the opposite side, and I'll even feather that up. And I get this amazing Christmas tree effect then. And in real wet conditions, it can make or break whether you get a fire going. So you end up with that. Now these will go straight on the fire. You can obviously cut these off if you want to and make loads of tiny little Christmas trees, and I find that works exceptionally well, especially for guys that are just starting out doing feather sticks. Eventually you'll be able to do great big long ones that you see. It may take a spark. We'll give it a go. This wood is relatively wet, or surprisingly wet, which I didn't think it was going to be, but it is. Damp wood can be a real problem. I of course left this wood out, so it did get soaking wet. You can see we've got fire from a simple feather. So that's that. Oh, silver birch. This is silver birch. It contains a lot of oils. You can process this down quite easily. Scraping it up. Scrape it up. Just keep scraping. As much as you can. Keep going. Now this is trial and error. I'll tell you what really works well for this, and I like it on my multi-tool, is a saw blade. I haven't got my saw with me, but I would have showed you. A saw works exceptionally well. Run the teeth along it. You can see the old silver birch takes a spark straight away. Easy ways of making fire. It's as simple as that. When it comes to feather sticking, practice, practice, practice. And that's what I'm going to say to you. Find a way and a technique that works for you, and you'll be making feather sticks in no time. And one more thing that I should mention. If you've got a Mora, or you can't afford an expensive bushcraft knife, the Moras work equally as good. So the Mora Bushcraft Black, I think, is the best Mora bushcraft knife that they do. It's my favourite. Built like a tank, and if you're a beginner, it's a very advanced knife for you to be using. So you can certainly get yourself one of them. So that's it. That is the easy guide really to feather sticking and making fires. So there are some key things you need to know when it comes to making fire. One is make sure you have permission on whoever's land it is you're doing it. And be very, very sensible. Bearing in mind in the summer you could start a forest fire. Be cautious of high pines and forestry land, because very often the ground's peaty and it will dry out and you could set an underground fire. So just be very cautious of that. And make sure you've always got adequate water supply near you. So if it does get out of hand, you can douse your flames down pretty quick with a can of water or a billy can full of water. You'd be surprised what kind of impact that'll have. Enjoy it, have fun with it, and use it to your advantage. Fire is a great asset to any bushcrafter and any survivalist. It's one of our key features that we must know. Practice, 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 and it's one of them skills that if anyone ever told me they were a professional or an expert in it and they could do it every time and they don't need to do it no more, don't listen to them, they're lying. Any skills that you learn outdoor are perishable skills, so make sure you keep practicing, practicing and practicing. And from time and time again I'll spend outside practicing feather sticking or fire lighting. It's one of the most key things to any survivalist or bushcrafter. So that's it. That's my basic guide on fire. Have fun. And if your ferrocerium rod can't get the fire going, don't be worried. Just use a box of matches. Because once you've achieved what you want to achieve, we lit the old honey stove. Helen lit the honey stove using a match, and it did the job quite nicely. It's kept all the flies off us. So that's it. We'll be back